the prime minister mentioning attacks on civilian areas, on holy sites. We also saw attacks seemingly very close to a nuclear research facility in Israel as well. And I wonder if you could kind of get us up to speed on where things stand with that. The strikes were on Dimona. I gather that's close to this nuclear research facility. How close exactly? Did it sustain any damage? And how does this kind of change the trajectory of this conflict?
Well, the strike in, first of all, good morning, David, Christina. The strike in Dimona resulted in fatality and a number of people injured. Not too far from Dimona, a missile hit Arad, where we had close to 100 people injured, 10 of them seriously. So it did result in some mass casualties. Did not strike our research center, but that's certainly where it appears they were aiming, although they do aim to maim and kill as many innocent people as possible. They target residential areas and, as the prime minister said, religious sites, tourist sites, wherever they can create the most damage. But we're proceeding according to plan. This is not instant soup. This is a war against a regime that's been in power for 5 decades and has brutally suppressed its people, and of course continues to be a threat to the entire region.
Ambassador, who carried out the strike next to the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran? Was that Israel or the U.S.?
To the best of my knowledge, Israel did not strike at Natanz. But again, this is a coordinated effort, and I don't believe that we discuss particular operational issues online. But I do not believe that Israel struck at Natanz.
I also want to ask you, the messaging from the American president has been saying that the U.S. has been very successful. Iran's military capability has been completely degraded. But we see the strike this morning, and we see the strike against Diego Garcia. What is your assessment of Iran's current strike capability? Because it seems like they still are able to cause damage.
Well, again, this is something that doesn't transpire overnight. This is a large, malign regime that has to be dealt with. Look, just imagine that they would have a nuclear-tipped weapon. The ballistic missiles that they're firing right now would have a nuclear tip. The way that the world is being held hostage right now at the Strait of Hormuz would be that much more difficult, that much more threatening. A barrel of oil would reach $250 if they wanted it to. So this at some point has to be stopped. This is a malign regime that's holding the world hostage. And it's going to take some time. Hopefully not too long, but we see dramatic cracks in the system. The edifice of this tyrannical regime is cracking. It has not opened up to wide chasms yet, but that's the direction it's going. We're seeing a degradation not only in their ability to fire these ballistic missiles, to get their drones off, but also in the morale. We have small units within the system of the IRGC and the Basij, which are not turning their weapons yet on their superiors, but they're not showing up for work. And that's a first. It's developing, and it's a process. We never knew exactly when the Soviet Union would fall or exactly when the Romanians would turn their guns against Ceausescu. But this is a people, 92 million, who want freedom, who want something else, who don't want the boot of the repressive regime on their necks anymore. So it's quite possible that we're going to see these cracks develop more, and refusal on the part of these brutal people to turn their guns against their own citizens.
Let me ask you about that. You mentioned those 92 million people. You see that the devastation and destruction that Israel and the U.S. have rendered on Iran's military sites and other places. If we do not see Iranians rise up, if we don't see regime change in any sort of traditional sense, are we at a moment or near it when Israel and the U.S. might say, look, both of those countries have devastated this country sufficiently. There won't be regime change. It's worth packing up and going home. Or is that really the end goal here? And what's your assessment of the level of patience and timeline for that to happen?
David, the end goal here is that there is not a power, an entity in Tehran which is capable of firing massive numbers of ballistic missiles, achieving a nuclear weapon, and supporting proxies around the region. If that can be achieved through the collapse of this regime, so be it. If not, that's the minimum we have to achieve. Remember, everybody's kind of surprised when negotiations stop. But, look, these people are murderers. They're mass killers. And murderers do not tell the truth. So to go into a negotiation with people who lie as a matter of fact. I mean, look at the ICBM that was fired yesterday. I mean, they claimed for years and years we don't have an ICBM. Well, they did. And the ICBM that can be fired at 4,000 kilometers, give them a little bit more time, and they're going to have an ICBM that's going to hit Chicago. So these people, they come in with their Cheshire cat grin, their smugness, and lie. So what is a negotiation worth with people who murder and lie? We have to achieve a situation where they simply are not capable of wreaking havoc on their neighbors and on the entire world.
To that end, I wonder if there are any concerns that it might have been a miscalculation to go after some of Iran's historic sites, to go after some of the energy infrastructure, because does that make it harder to accomplish that goal, to either get a regime that doesn't threaten Israel or its allies, or if the regime does fall, to then install a functioning government if the country and the infrastructure isn't there?
That's a great question, Christina. Look, there's a dilemma here, okay? I mean, and it's a fair dilemma when we're talking about strategy. If the regime is going to stay, or some form of this regime is going to stay in power, then it's absolutely necessary to devastate their national infrastructure so they're incapable of malign actions in the future. If they're not going to stay in power, then you don't want to destroy the national infrastructure because you want them to be able to resuscitate themselves. So we're moving, I think, in a parallel fashion, and that's going to depend. You have to make an assessment from day to day, from week to week. That's very much an operational assessment on the part of our militaries. So I think it's going to become clear over the next week or so, but we're marching in that direction to completely eliminate the possibility where there's going to be an entity in Tehran which is going to be able to fire these ballistic missiles, support the Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. I mean, just think about it. If tomorrow, the Houthis take over the Bab el-Mandeb passageway, the Straits of Aden. So we're going to have a situation where, the entire world market is going to be shut down because of the whim of an Ayatollah sitting in Tehran. I mean, this is just simply unacceptable. It can't continue. And they've been calling our bluff now for 5 decades. And this has to stop. For us in Israel, it's an absolutely existential issue, immediate existential issue, because we see what these ballistic missiles can do. And if they have hundreds that they can fire in every round, which was their plan after the June war, to build thousands of these medium-range ballistic missiles and fire them all at once in order to overwhelm our multi-layered missile defense system. If they're able to do that, that Israel's a tiny country. It's the size of New Jersey. We simply can't allow that to happen. But it's not just Israel. I mean, look at their firing into all their neighbors, to Saudi Arabia, to Oman, to the Emirates, to Bahrain. They're particularly focused on the Emirates because the Emirates is a projection of a very moderate Islam that accommodates the West, that accommodates Judeo-Christian civilization. They hate the Emirates more than anybody else. And that's why they fired so many of these drones into the Emirates. And we're delighted to be able to assist them as much as we can.
Mr. Ambassador, let me interrupt if I could, just because
this malign regime has to be brought down.
Last question here is just about Lebanon. You'll forgive a basic question here, but what are Israel's goals there? We see 800,000 people displaced there, torrential rains affecting many of those people who have been displaced. As we look at where there might be daylight between Israel and the U.S., do you feel like the U.S. supports Israel's attacks on Lebanon, and where do you see them leading to?
Well, let me push back on that question, David. Israel's attacks on Lebanon are a reaction to Hezbollah's missiles being fired into our cities. We are not going to allow a terrorist entity that has taken over our northern border, has sapped it of its strength, to fire missiles into our communities. It's just that simple. I mean, just imagine that, you had missiles coming over from Canada into Montana. I mean, you'd erase the other side of the border. So we want peace with Lebanon. There's no reason in the world we can't live in a harmonious peace with our northern neighbor. Most of the Lebanese want it as well, but their country has been occupied by this terrorist entity. So we have to protect our northern border. And ultimately, the Lebanese themselves have to rid their country of this malign influence coming out.